So this brings us to the last presentation, not the least, of this morning in terms of Geneva, but I think it's already afternoon in Central Europe, which will be a presentation by David Birnbaum. And many of you know David from our webinar we had on the 30th of November. So David, as you know, is a industry veteran, a strategist in terms of industry. He started his work, well, actually he worked his whole life in the garment sector, starting as a pattern maker, and then working in factories, then managing factories, and then building factories. And he's been working with us also on develop some new tools for companies, from garment costing to the full value costing. But today he will like to put a little bit of a tweak on this in light of what we discussed earlier, also with Mr. Asif Ibrahim from Bangladesh, on the aspect of fairness and how can full garment value costing induce fairness for manufacturers, but also for buyers. And this could be a hopefully also very interesting contribution to this discussion on the global value chains. So with this small remarks, David, I hand over the ball to you, and we are curious on how full value costing and fairness work together. Over to you.
Good afternoon. Matthias, can you hear me? Okay, let's begin. My name is David Birnbaum. I am a global garment specialist. Just to give a little history, as I said in the earlier presentations, I began my career as a pattern maker. I spent 20 years working in factories, during which time I worked in factories, I managed factories, and I built factories. Later on, people came to me with problems. I think the first instance was a large garment factory that asked me to reorganize their sample department. And that led to other contracts, reorganizing factories, reorganizing sourcing for customers, opening, buying offices. Later on, more recently, the institutions, like the World Bank, like Matthias's ITC people, began to recognize that the garment industry is the first stage of industrial development. It's the introduction to foreign trade. It is an industry which requires limited capital and is highly labor intensive. And therefore, it is a very good beginning for economic development. Typically, we take people from subsistence farming, mostly women, and bring them into factories and train them. Their wages, many instances, equal maybe 60, 70% of their village's cash income. It changes them, it changes the industry. Later on, more sophisticated industries set up in the country, and they take our workers simply because they can pay more. This is the advantage of our industry. But our industry faces some serious problems. For example, our industry is not held in high regard by very many people. They think of us as exploiters of poor people. This is true of the associations, the governments, the institutions, NGOs, even our consumers. The problem here is that we cannot overcome this and other problems because we are caught up in a failed decision-making process. The decisions we make do not lead to the results we expect. We have looked at this problem for some years with the result that we feel there is a need for an alternate decision-making process. And so we created cost to value analysis. And the system is very easy to understand. Cost is what the supplier pays for materials and processing. Value is what the customers pay for materials and processing. Almost everyone in the industry is both a supplier and a customer. The yarn spinner is the fiber's supplier's customer, but at the same time, they are the weaver's supplier. The retailer and the brand is the garment factory's customer, but at the same time, the consumer supplier. What is important to understand here is that value defines price. Every decision we make carries a cost. Every decision should create a value. Simply put, the correct decisions are the ones where the value received is greater than the cost. This is fairly simple to understand, but we see what happens when we start applying it to basic problems. We're talking here about how the relationship between the factory and the customer should exist in a reasonable manner. People talk about the fairness principle, okay? The relationship between the factory and the customer or the brand should be based on fairness. The problem is that in developing countries where factories specialize in commodity products production, the customer is continually forcing down FOB price, while at the same time, garment costs are continually rising. The point is reached when the factory cannot make a profit on the goods. Indeed, the cost of the product is higher than what the customers pay. Now, under the fairness principle, the solution, since the problem was caused by the customer should be forced somehow to increase the price paid to the point where you have a fair relationship. Let me say at once, the data is clear. Factories have been forced to close because they are unable to show a profit based on the low prices demanded by the customer. This is one perspective. But when we apply cost of value analysis, we see something else. When we look at the relationship in the factory and the customer, we see something on a global basis. It is not that the customer pays these factories lower prices, but rather that the customer is paying everybody else higher prices. Since price is based on value, the customer is paying the losing factory lower FOB prices because their products are worth less than the products supplied by the factories that are paid a higher price. The data here is equally clear. The solution lies with the factories. Find out what your customers want and give it to them. This is how cost of value works. One of the problems we have with the fairness principle is that you cannot define fairness, and you can't enforce it. And most importantly, many of the assumptions that go into the fairness principle are demonstrably untrue. For example, in industries based on low FOB prices, both the factories and the customers believe that the consumer places low price as the single greatest value. It's demonstrably false. You look at the data and you see a different picture. This is a list of the 10 top garment exporters in 2019. It's taken from the International Trade Center. China is not number 2, it's number 1 with 29.4%. The EU at 28.6 is number 2. In point of fact, the EU's market share is greater than the next 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, the sum of those countries. So why is China doing so well? Why does the EU do so well? You have to understand the value that they provide. And you can make your own list. This is a simple list of what they do. First of all, both have great textile industries. You can buy just about all the fabric you need locally produced. They are the easiest places to do business. Both countries concentrate on sophisticated fashion products. both have educated management, educated technical specialists, and well-trained workers. And both have strong domestic strong domestic demand, particularly for fashion clothing. That's why they are ahead. That's the value that they're contributing. This leaves the basic question, where are they different? And of course, we know where they're different, and that's in FOB price. This is a list of 10 major products, also taken from the ITC. The years are different because the ITC cannot gather the latest information in many cases. But what you see is very clear. If you take a man's woven cotton shirt, the Chinese FOB price is $6. The FOB price for the same product in the EU is 2.5 times greater. And you see as you go down the list, it's twice better, 2.5 times, 3 times greater, so that people are paying more money for a made in EU garment rather than a made in China garment. Both are successful, but when it comes to the price, the EU beats out China every time. Why? You have to understand the value that the EU provides. There are two areas. One is design. The truth is the EU is home to the greatest agglomeration of design centers in the world. You think of it, Italy, France, Spain, Netherlands, Sweden, Germany. Importers placing orders in the EU generally rely on EU design. Contrast this with China, where customers placing orders provide their own designs, often of EU origin. However, the greatest value that the EU provides is the brand. Come on, you think of it personally, made in Italy, made in France, made in Spain. There's a cachet there. This allows the retailer, the brand to charge a higher price. Now, some may argue that this cachet is unwarranted, but the fact is that it does exist. And for that reason, because of the branding, the EU can charge a higher price than China. When you think of the fairness principle, we're left with a single conclusion. In the changing industry, the customers, that's the retail and brands, and the factories continue to believe low price equals higher value will not survive. The trend is against them. Compare this with alternative 2, ethical standards. Well, ethical standards has an advantage. One thing is definable. There's a growing consensus where the consumer is looking for factory worker rights, better factory working conditions, factory worker safety, sustainability, reduce pollution, reduce global warming. I think most professionals would agree that is what ethical standards is about. Contrary to popular belief, increasingly, in a consumer-driven market, customers must meet consumer requirements. One of the great examples occurred about 4 or 5 years ago with the Angora sweater. Angora comes from rabbits, which is very important. Different countries have a different cultural view of the rabbit. In Europe, Hassid Coniglia, we eat the rabbits. In Australia, we shoot them as vermin. But in the United States, the rabbit has a great cultural part. We think of Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, Peter Rabbit. We think of the Easter Bunny. About 5 years ago, an animal rights group published in great detail how we get the hair off the Easter Bunny. That was the end of the Angora industry. People just wouldn't buy. And the customers had to follow through. One of the great interesting problems we have today is the fact that customers, in the beginning when the coronavirus hit, customers failed to pay their bills. This is the great conundrum. To pay or not to pay, that was the country. In the beginning, Many substantial customers, important customers, reliable customers simply refuse to pay their bills. Yet an increasingly large number changed. It is not that they found religion. It is rather that they realized that perhaps the value to them of not paying their bills might be less than the reputation they're going to have with the consumer, and therefore the costs might be too high. This is how ethical standards work. I want to give you a really difficult example. We're talking about the COVID-19 pandemic and ethical standards, child labor and slavery. Okay. I'm not telling you anything you don't know already. Garment exporting countries in Asia have serious problems with both child labor and slavery. In a recent report by Goodweed, they indicate that the advent of the virus has markedly increased child labor and slavery in Asian-based garment exporting countries. Okay. This is the data coming out. Now, I assume that everybody listening believes firmly that they are totally opposed to child labor and slavery. Yet, if you look at this from the point of view of the fairness principle, there is an argument for both child labor and slavery. As terrible as it seems, the COVID-19 virus has resulted in factory closures, increased unemployment. In most developing and least developed countries, factory workers have no savings and little or no government support. There just isn't the money there. The loss of a job can be life-threatening to every member of the family. Think about it. Under those circumstances, any family member with a job, mother, father, son, or daughter, means survival for the family. Without a job holder, the alternative is to borrow money using your child as collateral. And I gotta tell you, as people who study this know, if the amount borrowed exceeds $500, the mother recognizes that the loan will never be repaid, leaving the child with a lifetime of indentured servitude. This is a terrible decision for any parent. Yet the reality is that he or she has no alternatives. We cannot blame the mother, nor can we demand that any individual or group provides funds necessary for the survival of the family. In this situation, when we think of fairness, it has no meaning. But there is a way forward. If I can find it. Look at it from the point of view of ethical standards. Think about the cost of value. The fairness principle deals with what should be. Ethical standards deal with what it is. Slavery and child labor is unethical. No matter how you wrap it up, it is unethical. But where does that leave us? And in fact, I think it leaves us in a pretty good place. Most of us have known of the existence of child labor and slavery. It was our industry's dirty little secret. We're aware of this for a long time. We knew what was going on. The participants, both the customers and the factories, hoped, well, the consumer would never know, or the consumer would not care. These hopes no longer exist. In today's consumer-driven industry, any customer, brand, retailer, caught selling a garment produced by an enslaved child will be out of business. I don't think anyone who thinks of this rationally will disagree. Under the circumstances, prudent retailers and brands would do well to immediately investigate every supplying factory. The "we did not know" defense, that won't succeed here anymore. Where does that leave the worker? Where does it leave the mother and father? Actually, in a pretty good position. The factory has to employ somebody. And if they can't employ children and they can't employ slave labor, well, they have to employ free parents. When we look at we look at how we should act in an ethical way, we realize that particularly as the industry shifts to consumer-driven, that many of the ethical problems we have will disappear, or those people who are caught out will disappear. In 2012, in Bangladesh, we had the terrible Rana Plaza catastrophe. Everybody on both sides, particularly on the EU side and the US side, set up organizations to assume it would never recur. It is 9 years later, and the scar is still there. Customers ask themselves every day, will there be another Rana Plaza? That is the price you pay for unethical behavior in a consumer-driven economy. The good news is that ethical standards in the consumer-driven economy, the move towards higher standards is an opportunity for factories to move forward. Because when you think about it, when they talk about all the great things, they talk about better workers' rights and worker safety, when they talk about less pollution, they talk about sustainability. Where is all this going to take place? It's not going to take place in London or New York. It's going to take place in the factory. The factory that moves ahead in these areas, these ethical areas, those factories will be the leaders of the new industry. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Thanks, David. There are no questions in the question and answer box. Jaina, are there any hand raised? Yes, there's one from Rajesh Beda from India.
Hi, Rajesh.
Please.
Hi, David.
Long time.
Long time, yes. Always great to listen to you. And while the principles, what you talked about are very important and profound, I would like to ask you if there is evidence where the factories that have made investments into ethical standards are sufficiently rewarded by their customers. Because many times, yeah.
This is one of the great questions. And I've been hearing it certainly for the last 30 years. My factory would do this if the customer would pay for it. That is the argument that we have. The truth is, the truth is that in a world of cost of value, the customer is paying for it. The customer is paying for service. For example, if you are a zero service factory, if all you can do is cut and sew garments, cheap garments at that, you're stuck with low prices. But if you can provide services, if you could transfer product development from New York or London to your factory in Bangladesh or India, then you're going to get paid more. And you do get paid more. You know, we have reached a point in the industry, I'm sorry to go off topic, but you've reached a point in the industry where we now have the strategic supplier. The guy is producing the product from hell, bras, bridal wear, 6 to 12 dresses for girls. These are horrible products. The guy who does that and does it well, his customers are waiting in line. They pray every night this guy should survive and be healthy and just work with them. And in return, they're going to give him work 12 months a year. There are the people who have that. There are people who have quality. There are some unbelievably great quality factories in this world. You know, if you can produce a cashmere coat for Prada, you don't have to worry. They're coming to you. But the big way forward is services. People are paying for services now. If you can move to speed to market, and if you can do product development, hey, then you can do trial orders. You can do quick response. It changed the industry. For the first time, we can see visible evidence that for 30 years we've been arguing, if you can deliver, they're going to pay.
Thank you, David. Yes, when I've seen the evidence of customers recognizing the service, customers recognizing the performance, it is what one sometimes wonders a little bit is that the strength of negotiation or power in the negotiation is still very much with customers. So compared to the investment what you make, the kind of premium what you would feel is justified or fair, that is still not coming. And that is where I think the ones who already invested feel sometimes a bit nervous that, it's not really a very fair world.
If you look at the quality factory, you look at the transnational factories, they charge premiums. They get paid more. If you're running $1 billion operation, if you're Esqueli or TAL, Crystal, somebody like that, you don't have to worry. You can stand as an equal to the customer, and you deliver. If you're working in Italy and you're delivering a quality product, you can deliver. The guy who is not providing the services and will not make the investment, because the return, yes, the return is not obvious and it isn't immediate. But if you don't make the investment, you're going to be in trouble. In the end, customers are paying because the consumer, as we've seen in the record, the consumer will pay for value. Anyway, Matthias?
Yes, sorry, I'm taking over the role of moderator as Matthias had to leave to an important meeting with the ITC executive director. So it will be my turn to ask if anyone has other questions. I can't see any new questions in the Q&A box. Anyone willing to open their microphone, raise their hands to ask a questions live, maybe? Okay, then maybe I'll ask a question also. I remember from last week's webinar that we had with you, David, we had many questions from suppliers in North Africa saying, okay, try to, put you in our shoes. We are pressured by lowering prices from our customers, but also, there are stricter regulations on environment, sustainability, social standards, compliance, and how can you reconcile all of this in order for them to survive and negotiate, good prices for them, especially during a time of COVID?
This is, Matthias has talked to me a little bit about the region. Let me say this. If you look at the 4 countries collectively together, they have what, a 1.9% global market share? Very small. Also, having worked in regions before, like in ASEAN, places of this sort, I have to tell you, there is no such thing as a regional industry. There are just countries. If you want to develop a regional industry, you have to provide the people in the region with a reason. They have to benefit. You have to provide something that brings benefit to each one. It's not about the government, it's about the factories. If you can show a factory how coming together with you, they will benefit. They will join. The trick is to find the areas of benefit. And you have the advantage, by the way, is that you are so small that the biggest handicap you have is that most of the customers won't open buying offices there because they really can't afford the expense. But if you can provide something that the customers really want, and those things that you can provide are many of the things that you're offering now, but not the way it should be. It's something for you to think about.
Вот нужно подумать об этом. Это вопрос на размышление. Это вопрос на размышление.
We had a little bit of a problem with the translator opening the mic.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me now? Because my mic turns off automatically, but yes, not now. Yeah. Okay, yeah. Good, thank you. So,
unfortunately, Julia, you were going at the same time as something's wrong, unfortunately.
This is exactly what I mentioned earlier today, that it's gonna overlap. I can't help it because I don't have the relevant interpretation function.
Go ahead, David.
Okay.
I mean, you think of it, I can't operate a telephone.
Вот представьте себе, что я не могу даже...
I can't open a door, with the modern technology. And
я не могу даже дверь открыть без современной технологии.
getting back.
Sorry.
Getting back to the problem at hand. If you can provide benefit to not to the industry, but to the people within the industry, to the factories, then you will build a regional industry. It's not a question of government. It's not a question of industry. They will have to pay the bill. But it's a question of getting the factories to join with you, because you're going to give them something they can't get on their own. That's the secret. That's the secret of success. In the end, when we were working in ASEAN, the budget went over, the limit. The participants, the factories and the mills, they put up the funds because they saw value in what we were doing. Anyway, that's it.
Yeah, I see a comment on the Q&A in French. So the name is not provided, by saying that during the COVID crisis, of course, there were no orders. So you can't even pay, your employees' salaries, your taxes, and so on. So finding value and benefits might be a struggle for many suppliers during this time of COVID, I guess.
Let me say this, and I'm not being simplistic. If you look at the great global companies today, ask yourself, how many of them began at the height of the Great Depression of the 1930s? Now is the time to think ahead. Now is the time to take whatever capital you have and hold it while you decide what the industry will be like 5 years from now and how you're going to get there. The industry going forward will be nothing like the industry it is today. And anybody who believes in incremental change to make their business more productive or to make their business more efficient or more profitable will fail. It's the guy who at the end of the 19th century who was manufacturing horse-drawn carriages and things, that he wanted to make his carriages better, more efficient. But the guy who decided in the carriage business, you know something, I want to invest in the horseless carriage. That's the guy who survived. We have to think now, at the worst time, not just how I'm going to survive, but how I'm going to move forward and be one of the first people there. It's really, this is a time when the people who get moving are the people who are going to be ahead. Anyway.
We still have some minutes left, so if anyone wants to ask questions.
Anybody want to argue with me?
Any experience sharing from companies in North Africa, in Madagascar, in Asia, maybe?
Now, let me say something in closing. We do, our work is what we call strategic development. And the projects we are doing today are so far away from the past, using technology intelligently, going ahead and building something that could never be done before. And there are people out there, factories, that are going ahead and gambling. I can't describe the projects themselves, but I can tell you that the industry going forward, what you call a factory won't exist. What you call a consumer will not exist. What you call the middleman won't exist. They'll all be merged in one. There'll be factories that are consumers. They're factories that will be developing their own brands. Have you ever heard of, what is it, Wool and the Bear? Wool and the Bear? This is a company where the consumer is the factory. People, it's about knitting at home. They send you the yarn and they give you an order. This is an order. And actually, most of the trade takes place between the women working at home. They ask one another, oh, can you make me a hand in this way or this way? That is a way forward. That is part of the new industry. There are ways, just as the brick and mortar industry is collapsing, there are people who are building stores for the future that are nothing like the stores today, where buying the clothing in the store is secondary. What brings them into the store is something else. Anyway, I can't go further.
Okay, last chance for questions.
Okay, could you please thank Matthias on my behalf for having invited me here, and tell him I will get back to him in a few days.
Okay, thank you so much, David, for your very lively presentation. I see another questions. Okay, supplier asking how to prospect, how to find business opportunities on the international markets, because they only have 5% of international clients and 95% of subcontracting.
Okay, this is really last answer. As he knows, to be a subcontractor is slow death. In the high season, yeah, they give you all the business, but in the low season, you have nothing. And you have to develop something on your own. And you have to see, what do you have that you can develop? Many people don't know what they have because they really don't understand the global industry. You know, there are projects out there for where small factories can do very, very well. It's something, perhaps, you know, that he wants to go back to Matthias, and, you know, we can talk about that. Okay? Take care.
Thank you so much, David. Okay, so we are almost done with this morning, Geneva time session. We are going to have a short lunch break, I mean, at least for the Europeans, and reconvene at 2 GTM +1 time to listen to 3 new sessions. And actually, David made a very nice transition, because saying you have to look at, you know, new markets, new opportunities, the industry is going to change, and it's actually what we are going to look at this afternoon during our sessions. We'll have Dr. Rajesh from India, who will speak about global good practices along the apparel value chain. We'll have Julia Hughes, the president of the US Fashion Industry Association, who will, you know, look at the prospects for the US apparel market in 2021. And we'll also have some representative from Euromonitor, who will present some of the prospects for the EU apparel market also in 2021. So very exciting sessions ahead. We hope you enjoy this morning session, and we'll see you in 1 hour, 15 minutes approximately online to further discuss and, you know, look ahead at, you know, future prospects on the international markets. See you very soon. Have a nice break.